I want to read a press release by the Security Council, the United Nations Security Council of 11 December 2006, because I think to look at the Iraq war situation, we have to remember that it's a very fluid situation. It has a lot of variables to the dynamic of what's happening, and it's important to take it one day at a time. We talk a lot about what led up to this point, who's at fault, who's responsible, what are the responsibilities of the parties involved, and I think those are all good points, but it's important to stay focused on what is currently happening in Iraq. And this is a press release that also includes statements by different countries and representatives of those countries, and I probably will not read those. But for those of you who have not read this, I'll put a link over here, if I can, if YouTube allows me to do that, on where you can find this document, and you can read the statements that were given by different countries' representatives. But it is Security Council 8895. It is the 5,583rd meeting of the Security Council, and the title of the release is "Iraq Stands on the Brink of Civil War. Violence Seems Out of Control." The special representative tells the Security Council, and the special representative is Ashraf Quasi. In a sober and urgent warning, the Secretary General said in his latest report on Iraq that the country stood on the brink of civil war and chaos. The special representative for Iraq, Ashraf Quasi, told the Security Council today in a joint briefing on the situation, with the United States representative speaking on behalf of the 25-country multinational force. The Secretary General's 5 December report states that the prospects of an all-out civil war and even a regional conflict have become more real in the past 3 months. Across many parts of the country, increasing numbers of Iraqis have been affected by growing violence and insecurity, with a significant rise in sectarian violence, insurgent and terrorist attacks, and criminal activities. Mounting militia activities have further destabilized the country, and high levels of civilian casualties and displacement on a daily basis are breeding an increasing sense of insecurity and deep pessimism. Mr. Quasi said that efforts by the government of Iraq and the multinational force have been unable to prevent the continuous deterioration of the security situation, which, if not reversed, would progressively undermine Iraq's political prospects. The violence seems out of control, he warned. This has provoked widespread concern for Iraq's future. Given the current lack of political unity, the fragmentation of Iraqi society, and the paralyzing levels of violence, it was not realistic to expect the government and parliament to bring about progress without the effective cooperation of the regional and international community. If Iraq stood any chance of avoiding a national catastrophe, a collective sense of urgency, resolve, and compromise was essential, he continued. Zero-sum solutions were not compatible with political stability and national security. There was no merit in the arguments that assume pessimistic outcomes in Iraq, because for the people of Iraq and the wider world, failure was not an option. A collective international and regional initiative in support of the government's efforts to reduce the current levels of violence and resolve key issues was the only way forward. There is no alternative, he said. Speaking on behalf of the multinational force, the United States representative agreed that security was a grave concern, with attacks at a high level, a 20% spike in the 3-month reporting period, marked by increased sectarian violence, often directed at civilians. Insurgents, extremists, and terrorists also continued their attacks, which were taking their toll on Iraqi civilians. Approximately 80% of the sectarian violence happened within a 35-mile radius of Baghdad. There was no question that the rise in sectarian violence had become the greatest threat to security and stability in Iraq. She said that the multinational force continued to train and develop the capabilities of the Iraqi security forces. Iraq was making progress in building security forces that were capable of independently combating insurgents and fighting terrorists, and the number of counterinsurgency operations they conducted independently as a percentage of total combat operations was increasing steadily. The United Nations also played a crucial role in Iraq's stability and development. Due to security concerns, however, it had recently temporarily reduced staff positions in Baghdad. A robust United Nations presence, however, remained essential to supporting Iraqi efforts. Iraq's neighbors also had an important role to play in the country's stability and security, she said. Iraq's representative said that the recent spate of terrorist and sectarian attacks had indeed sparked concerns within and outside Iraq, causing many to issue dangerous warnings that the country was on the brink of civil war. Iraq knew very well who was carrying out those violent acts, as well as their objective. They were the Saddamists, and extremists, and the criminal gangs, and they shared one immediate goal, namely the undermining of the whole political process. The government would face them forcefully and decisively. The Iraqi people had succeeded in the past 3 years in completing the political and constitutional process, and they would emerge victorious in national dialogue and conciliation, defeat of terrorism, and the preservation of the people and their land, he said. Council members expressed growing concern about the latest wave of violence and the increasing casualties being borne by Iraqi civilians and international forces. Pressing for a new strategy, many members saw the government's key challenges as the need to develop a fully inclusive political process, establish a monopoly over the use of force, address the terrorists, insurgency, sectarian and criminal violence, remove the militia elements from all ministries and Iraqi security forces, and cultivate a supportive regional environment. Some welcomed a possible international conference on Iraq, through which additional creative proposals might emerge as an important prelude to stabilization and ultimate recovery. Statements in the debate were also made by the representatives of France, Greece, Argentina, Peru, United Kingdom, Russia Federation, United Republic of Tanzania, China, Japan, Ghana, Denmark, Slovakia, Congo, and Qatar. Also noted in this press release was the number of civilian casualties in Iraq, and it states, although the figures on civilian casualties since March 2003 vary between 50,000 and 600,000, depending on the sources, the real issue is the predicament of the Iraqi people, the Secretary General states. The deteriorating security situation has continued to adversely impact on human rights, humanitarian situations, and overall living standards. The large number of casualties is having a much wider social impact than the immediate death or injury. Fatal incidents invariably produce widows, orphans, and female-headed households who must bear the burden of lost breadwinners and broken families. This is becoming a permanent disabling factor for human development and greatly adds to the burden of reliable access to proper health care, social services, education, employment, and economic opportunities, which remain largely absent in Iraq today. This is not a small problem. This is not a problem that somebody is going to be able to answer in a 10-minute video. It's not a problem that one person can answer. It's a problem that involves many different parties, many different nations, many different nuances to economics, because we all know that oil is involved. We all know that the politics of money is involved. There are so many facets to this problem. But I believe that what was being said in that statement of 11 December is that Not only does the government of Iraq need to establish itself, which it really has not done, as far as having control of the country, that it needs to establish itself. And the way that it has to do that is to monopolize military force. It cannot do that as long as the United States is there with 148,000 troops and a spattering of other troops. I think there's about 168,000 troops still in the country. 148,000 of those are United States. But with those troops there is going to be an ongoing push by the opposition to remove the foreign entities within the country. If those are not removed, if we maintain a presence in Iraq, we handicap the Iraqi government from taking the lead in solving the problems of their own country. That statement also said that the regional neighbors of Iraq, including Iran and Syria, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the immediate neighbors, need to also engage in aiding the stabilization of Iraq. That's not a small order. That's not something that's going to be very simple to do, to have these countries work together to aid a neighbor that's being occupied by a foreign force. Again, if we move out of Iraq, perhaps that will move. The third element was the international community, was getting the international community involved. Yes, there's a coalition of the willing, but that coalition of the willing is not a international force. And I know that some will disagree with that. Oh yes, it's an international force. Not really. It's a handful of small countries. It's a handful of Eastern Bloc countries, countries that just became untied from the Soviet Union. And then we have the United States, Great Britain, South Korea, which has quite a few there, and Australia. And between those four, the United States maintains over 90% of the military force on the ground. To begin international cooperation on the problem, Iraq needs to be seen as an independent state. As long as the United States is there pulling the strings, maintaining the security, doing the rebuilding, even though I'm in agreement that the United States is now obligated to help in reconstruction. We destructed it, we need to reconstruct it. But to help do that, we need to step back. Many believe that there is going to be a vacuum of violence that occurs if we do that. I submit it won't be any worse than what it is now. And it's escalating. It's growing. The violence is growing in the country. As long as that violence grows, these things that were stated by the special representative for Iraq, those things are not going to happen as long as violence grows. And we all know that, yes, the president says that the violence is directed completely. In fact, it was stated in this report that the violence was directed at destabilizing the government. But I would say that one of the underlying reasons for that violence is that government is propped up by the United States. And the people of Iraq do not have their freedom. They are still under the hand of a foreign force, being us. I'm not for pulling completely out. In fact, I know that the United Nations has given us a go for continuing through the end of 2007. The United States government has said that we will be there through the end of 2007. And that's another year. That's another year of our soldiers being in harm's way, our soldiers dying. That's another year of Iraqi civilian casualties, another year of car bombs, IEDs, RPG attacks, executions, kidnappings. But perhaps it can be a year where we decide we need to bring everybody together to solve this problem. Because it's a very big problem. It's going to take a lot of answers. It's going to take a lot of brains, a lot of creativity to make it happen. So hopefully Zach will understand, and everybody who has responded to Zach will understand that the web that created this and the labyrinth that we're going to have to navigate to get out of it is complicated. All of it will be important to focus on what's best for the people, what's going to stop the killing, what's it going to do to the entire region. No, I agree that failure is not an option. We can't just pull out and say, well, we failed there, and we'll just see what happens. I don't necessarily agree with that. But I also don't agree that we can continue using our military force to solve the problem. We need to talk. We need to talk with many people. We need to talk with people that we don't want to talk to. Iran being number one. Iran, I'm sure, is more than willing to help. Yes, they are an Islamic state. They have a lot more to lose if Iraq erupts into civil war than we do. Our government has said we will pull out if there's civil war. Well, we'll see. But anyway, there is a very long answer to a very difficult question. Take care.